Adrian Cole once believed he had it all figured out. At 46, he had the kind of success most people only dream about: a thriving logistics company, a glass-walled office overlooking downtown Seattle, and a reputation for being the man who could make anything move anywhere. He wasn't born into money. He built Cole Freight Solutions from an empty garage, one rented truck, and a promise to himself that he'd never again work for people who didn't value him. For years, everything he touched turned to gold. Until, one day, it didn't. The fall. It started quietly. A delayed shipment here, a broken partnership there. Then one morning, Adrian opened an email that would change everything. His CFO, a man named Brent Lowell, had resigned, and with him, he'd taken 3 key contracts and half the operations team. Brent wasn't just leaving, he was starting his own company, financed by one of Adrian's largest investors. Adrian sat at his desk, staring at the message. For a long time, he said nothing. He didn't shout, he didn't call anyone, he just stared out the window at the ships moving slowly through the harbor, their lights reflected in the water. In business, betrayal rarely arrives with thunder. It comes softly, in the form of a friendly handshake that lasts too long. Within 6 months, Cole Freight Solutions was bleeding. Clients followed Brent, suppliers hesitated, banks called, and the once confident Adrian began to shrink inside himself. He mortgaged his home to pay salaries. He sold 2 of his beloved trucks to cover rent. When he finally walked into the boardroom one gray morning and announced his resignation, no one looked him in the eye. He left with one small box, a few files, a photo of his late wife, and the keychain from his first truck. Outside, the rain had started. Seattle always seemed to rain when Adrian's life changed. The silence. For the next year, he disappeared. No one knew where he went. Some said he'd moved to Oregon to start a farm. Others whispered that he was consulting under another name. The truth was quieter. Adrian rented a tiny cabin near the Puget Sound. 1 bedroom, 1 desk, 1 chair. He spent mornings walking along the shore, afternoons reading old journals, and nights staring at spreadsheets from his past life. Failure has a way of cleaning the soul. It strips you bare until you see what really mattered in the first place. For Adrian, it wasn't money. It wasn't prestige. It was the feeling of building something honest. One foggy morning, while sipping coffee on the porch, he received a message from a young man named Eli Turner. Eli had once worked as an intern at Cole Freight Solutions. He was 26 now, bright, loyal, idealistic. He wrote, "Mr. Cole, I've started something new, small but growing. We handle sustainable last-mile delivery. I need advice, maybe a mentor. Would you be open to a chat?" Adrian stared at the message for a long time. He hadn't been called Mr. Cole in over a year. He typed back one word: tomorrow. The spark. Eli's office was nothing like the sleek headquarters Adrian once owned. It was a cramped room above a coffee shop, with 3 laptops, 2 bicycles, and a map pinned to the wall. But the energy, that restless, hungry, unstoppable energy, was there. Eli explained his dream. He wanted to build a delivery network using electric vans and bikes, focusing on eco-friendly logistics for small businesses. No diesel, no waste, just clean local delivery. Adrian listened. Every part of him recognized that fire, the same fire he once had. At the end of the meeting, Eli said softly, "I can't pay you, sir, but I can promise you something real, a second start." Adrian smiled for the first time in months. Then let's start there. Rebuilding. The first few weeks were chaos. They had no funding, no reliable drivers, and no proper software. But they had belief. And sometimes belief is the rarest currency in business. Adrian started where he knew best: structure. He set up spreadsheets, mapped delivery routes, and trained drivers. He taught Eli how to pitch investors without sounding desperate. He made sure every customer call was returned, every complaint answered. Slowly, the company, Green Track Logistics, began to grow. 1 client became 3, 3 became 10. They partnered with local coffee roasters, flower shops, and organic grocers.
People noticed, because GreenTrack wasn't selling delivery, they were selling trust. And Adrian had learned, painfully, that trust was the foundation of every lasting success. Old ghosts. One afternoon, Adrian received a call from an unknown number. When he answered, the voice on the other end made his heart tighten. "Adrian," said Brent Lowell. "It's been a while." There was a long silence. Then Brent continued, "I hear you're mentoring some kid now. Eco something, right? Funny, we were just about to enter that market." Adrian said nothing. He didn't need to. Brent laughed. "Don't take it personally. It's just business." When the call ended, Adrian walked outside. The wind off the sound was cold, but it felt clean. For the first time, he didn't feel anger. He felt clarity. Sometimes the past doesn't need to be fought. It just needs to be outgrown. Momentum. Over the next year, GreenTrack expanded into 3 cities. Investors began calling them. And Eli, always nervous young dreamer, grew into a confident leader. Adrian preferred to stay in the background. He didn't want headlines or titles. He wanted purpose. When GreenTrack landed a contract with a national bookstore chain, they celebrated with pizza and paper cups of soda in the office. Eli stood up and said, "This company exists because one man taught me that failure isn't the end. It's just the quiet part before the comeback." Everyone clapped. Adrian simply smiled and raised his cup. That night, alone in the office, he looked at the map on the wall. All the new routes, the cities, the expansion plans, and he whispered to himself, "I'm back. Just not the way I expected." The offer. 2 months later, an email arrived from a corporate address Adrian knew too well. Cole Freight Solutions. The company that once betrayed him was struggling. Brent's expansion had gone too fast, too wide. Clients were leaving, margins collapsing. And now, they wanted GreenTrack to handle their urban deliveries. Attached was a note. "Adrian, we believe partnership could benefit both sides." He read it twice, then again. It was almost poetic. The company that once threw him out now needed him to survive. He called Eli into his office. "Do you want to partner with them?" he asked. Eli hesitated. "Do you?" Adrian thought for a long moment. Then he said quietly, "I want to show them that you can build an empire without destroying your soul." The meeting. The boardroom was the same. Same glass walls, same view of the harbor. But everything felt smaller now, like a monument built to ego, not purpose. Brent Lowell walked in, older, heavier, eyes tired. "Adrian," he said, forcing a smile, "you look good." "So do you," Adrian replied politely. They sat across from each other. Brent explained the proposal, joint operations, shared clients, possible merger down the line. Adrian listened quietly. When Brent finished, Adrian said, "I'm not here to take what's left of this company. I'm here to build something better." Brent looked confused. "So you're saying yes?" Adrian shook his head. "I'm saying no. GreenTrack will remain independent, but will deliver your goods, because your clients deserve reliability, even if you couldn't give it." For the first time, Brent didn't have a comeback. He just nodded slowly. There was defeat in his eyes, but also respect. As Adrian left the building, he looked back one last time, not in anger, in gratitude. Because that betrayal years ago had created the space for something greater to be born. Reflection. That night Adrian drove to the waterfront. The city lights shimmered over the black water. He remembered the first night he lost everything, standing in the rain, feeling broken. Now he stood in the same place, but lighter, freer. He thought of all he had learned, that revenge wastes energy, that quiet persistence builds empires, and that the real comeback isn't loud. It's calm, deliberate, graceful. And above all, that leadership isn't about being at the top. It's about lifting others while you rise. He whispered into the night, the comeback isn't about proving them wrong. It's about proving to yourself that you still can.
The world had changed again. And so had Adrian Cole. 2 years had passed since that final meeting with Brent Lowell. Green Track Logistics was no longer a small, scrappy startup. It had become a movement, a quiet revolution in sustainable delivery. Cities that once ignored them now wanted partnerships. Investors that once laughed at eco-delivery now called every week, hoping for a seat at the table. But Adrian wasn't chasing expansion anymore. He was chasing balance. He'd learned that success without peace is just another kind of failure. New roads. Every morning, Adrian still arrived at the office before sunrise. He'd make his own coffee, sit by the window, and watch the first delivery vans roll out into the gray morning light. It reminded him of the old days, the smell of diesel, the thrill of growth. But now, the air was clean. The engines were silent. The future, for once, felt gentle. Eli had grown into a remarkable leader. He was bold where Adrian was patient, ambitious where Adrian was careful. They balanced each other, the dreamer and the survivor. One morning, Eli burst into Adrian's office holding a printed email. "Japan," he said breathlessly. "A major retailer there wants to partner with us. They love our zero-emission delivery system. They want us to build a pilot model in Tokyo." Adrian took the paper and read it slowly. He smiled. "You know what that means, right?" Eli grinned. "Global." Adrian leaned back. "Global means chaos, my friend, but maybe the good kind." And just like that, a new chapter began. The crossing. Adrian hadn't traveled overseas in years. The plane ride to Tokyo felt almost spiritual. The quiet hum of the engines, the city lights fading below, the clouds stretching endlessly ahead. He admired that. And when he arrived, he didn't go straight to the meeting. Instead, he took a long walk through the streets of Shibuya before sunrise. The city was still half asleep. Neon lights flickered against wet pavement, and as he watched delivery workers move efficiently through narrow lanes, he realized something. The world doesn't need faster. It needs smarter. When the meeting finally began, he was ready. The Japanese board members were polite but skeptical. They'd seen dozens of foreign companies fail to adapt to their systems. But Adrian didn't pitch technology. He pitched philosophy. He said, "We're not here to compete. We're here to collaborate, to make cities breathe easier, to make deliveries kinder to the world that supports them." For a long time, the room was silent. Then the chairman, an elderly man named Mr. Takahashi, smiled faintly and said, "You speak of delivery like it is a living thing. That is rare." Adrian bowed slightly. "That's because it is, sir. It connects people." By the end of the meeting, they shook hands. Green Track Tokyo was born. New temptations. Back in Seattle, expansion fever began to spread. Adrian's quiet little company had become a magnet for investors. Emails arrived daily, venture capital, acquisition offers, even a potential IPO. Eli was excited. "This could make us unstoppable," he said one evening, pacing in the office. "With the right funding, we could go global in a year." Adrian smiled patiently. "And lose everything that made us different in the process." Eli frowned. "You're being too cautious." "Maybe, but I've seen what happens when growth becomes greed. We build slower, but we last longer." Eli didn't argue,
But the tension was there, the pull between old wisdom and young ambition. And slowly, that tension began to test their partnership. The divide. Months passed. GreenTrack Tokyo became a success story, but with every success came new decisions, bigger, harder, riskier. Eli started taking calls without Adrian. He hired consultants who spoke in numbers and metrics, not values. He began to talk about scalability, exit strategy, valuation. Words Adrian had grown to distrust. One night, Adrian entered the office and found Eli still working. He stood quietly by the door for a while, then said, "You're building an empire, Eli. Just make sure you're not losing the soul of it." Eli looked up, tired and defensive. "With all respect, Adrian, times are different now. We can't stay small forever." Adrian nodded slowly. "You're right, but don't mistake noise for growth." They stared at each other, mentor and student, past and future. Neither spoke again that night. The storm. It happened faster than anyone expected. A major investor pushed for an aggressive expansion into Europe. Adrian agreed. Adrian warned against it, but his voice was outvoted. Within 6 months, GreenTrack Europe was running. But so were the problems. Delayed permits, cultural gaps, exhausted staff. The company began burning cash faster than it could earn it. Adrian stayed calm. He'd seen storms before. He tried to guide from the background, offering advice quietly. But one evening, Eli snapped. "You keep warning me like I'm about to fall. Maybe I need to fall to see what you mean." Adrian sighed. "I don't want to be right, Eli. I want you to last." For the first time since they'd met, the room felt colder between them. The breaking point. Then came the press leak. A journalist published an article claiming GreenTrack was planning a full merger with Cole Freight Solutions, the very company that once betrayed Adrian. The internet exploded. Clients panicked. The rumor wasn't true, but the damage was done. Adrian called Eli immediately. "Where did this come from?" His silence said everything. He finally admitted the truth. The merger had been discussed, in secret, with Brent Lowell himself. Adrian closed his eyes. So, the circle was complete. Betrayal had come again, only this time from someone he trusted even more. When he spoke, his voice was calm but heavy. "Eli, I told you some doors don't lead forward, they lead backward." Eli tried to explain, to justify. "I didn't mean..." But Adrian stopped him gently. "Eli, I forgive you, but I can't stand beside you in this." And just like that, Adrian Cole walked away again. The solitude returns. He moved back to the cabin by the water, the same one from years before. Same wooden desk, same silence. But this time, it didn't feel like exile. It felt like clarity returning. He spent his days writing, reflecting, and mentoring small startups online, people trying to build with integrity. He refused all interviews, all podcasts, all offers. He didn't need the spotlight. He needed peace. Months passed quietly, until one day, a letter arrived, handwritten. It was from Eli. "Adrian, I made a mistake. I forgot why we started. Everything you warned me about, it happened. Investors pulled out. Brent vanished. Staff left.
I don't know how to fix it. If you can forgive me, I need your help. Eli. Adrian folded the letter slowly. Then, without hesitation, he stood up, grabbed his coat, and walked toward his truck. The return again. When he entered the old office, the silence was deafening. Desks half empty, monitors off, a whiteboard filled with half-erased goals. Eli sat alone at his desk, eyes red, hair unkempt. He looked up like a boy who'd lost everything. Adrian, I don't even know where to start. Adrian smiled softly. Start where we did the first time, with honesty. They sat for hours, rebuilding from the ashes.
The world has a strange way of remembering people. Some are remembered for their noise, some for their fame, and a rare few, like Adrian Cole, are remembered for their silence. After Green Track's rebirth, Adrian's story began to spread again, not through headlines or flashy press releases, but through whispers, quiet mentions in classrooms, leadership talks, and startup podcasts. They called him the man who came back twice. But Adrian didn't care about titles. He cared about continuity, the kind of growth that survives storms. The new generation. Green Track had evolved. It wasn't just a logistics company anymore. It had become a learning platform, a mentoring hub for sustainable entrepreneurs. Eli proposed an idea. Let's teach others what you taught me, he said, not just how to run a company, but how to rebuild one when it breaks. Adrian smiled softly. That's the only lesson that really matters. So, they launched the Green Track Fellowship, a global mentorship program. Young entrepreneurs from Africa, India, Brazil, and Eastern Europe joined online workshops, led by Adrian and his small team. They learned about resilience, ethics, calm leadership, ideas that most business schools barely mentioned. Every Sunday morning, Adrian would log into the online sessions from his cabin. He'd appear on screen with his coffee mug, his gray sweater, and his quiet smile. He never gave lectures. He told stories, personal ones. He'd say, I don't have secrets. I only have scars. And every scar is a lesson. Students listened in silence, often with tears in their eyes. Because what he taught wasn't strategy, it was peace. The young visionary. One of those students was a 24-year-old woman from Kenya named Lydia Mwangi. She ran a small eco-packaging startup called Leafbox. Her company was on the verge of collapse after a supplier betrayal. But when she heard Adrian's story, something in her changed. She stayed after one of his sessions and asked, Mr. Cole, how do you keep believing after people break your trust? Adrian thought for a long moment before answering. Because trust isn't about them, it's about you. If you let betrayal kill your belief in goodness, they win twice. Lydia nodded slowly. That one sentence reshaped her entire mindset. Months later, she sent Adrian an email. Subject line, "We made it." Inside were photos of her factory, rebuilt, expanded, thriving. She ended the message with, "I built this with your calm in my heart." Adrian printed that line and pinned it on his cabin wall. It reminded him that real success multiplies, not in profit, but in people. A call from the past. One quiet evening, Adrian received an unexpected message. It was from Brent Lowell. He stared at the name for a long time. The man who had once destroyed him was reaching out again years later. The message was short. Adrian, I know I have no right to ask this, but I'd like to see you. Not about business, about forgiveness. Brent. Adrian didn't reply immediately. He walked outside, sat on the dock, and watched the reflection of the moon on the water. Then he whispered to himself, "Maybe the universe never stops testing us." 2 weeks later, he met Brent at a small cafe in Seattle. Time had not been kind to him. His hair was gray, his posture bent, but his voice trembled not with power, but with regret. Adrian said softly, "I lost everything. The company folded after I sold it. The investors turned on me. I burned every bridge I built, and I deserve it." Adrian listened quietly. Brent continued, "But I keep hearing your name. Every article, every talk, people speak of your grace. I wanted to see it for myself. How did you let it go?" Adrian smiled gently. "I didn't let it go, Brent. I grew around it." Brent frowned. "What do you mean?" Adrian sipped his coffee. "When a tree is wounded, it doesn't erase the scar. It grows around it, stronger, wider. That's what I did." For a long time, Brent said nothing. Then, with tears in his eyes, he whispered, "I'm sorry." Adrian reached across the table and said, "Then let that be enough. No handshake, no dramatic ending, just peace, the kind that needs no audience." Legacy and letting go. By the time Adrian turned 63, GreenTrack had offices in 18 countries. But he didn't run any of them. He had built something self-sustaining, a system of trust. Eli, now CEO, insisted on one tradition. Every new manager must spend 1 month working in a delivery van before joining the corporate office. Adrian loved that rule. He said, "It keeps their feet on the ground." The company's culture became a global case study. Universities invited Adrian to speak, but he declined most of them. He'd rather talk to a room of 10 dreamers than a hall of 500 executives. He often said, "The best lessons don't echo in auditoriums. They whisper in quiet rooms." As he grew older, Adrian spent more time in nature. He planted trees along the coast, each one named after someone who had taught him a lesson, even the painful ones. One was named Brent, another Eli, another Lydia. Each name marked a chapter of growth. Then one morning, a package arrived. Inside was a handwritten letter from the President of the United Nations Council for Sustainable Industry. It read, "Mr. Cole, your work has inspired a generation. We would be honored if you delivered the keynote address at our global summit this fall. The theme is Rebuilding with Integrity." Eli urged him to accept. "Adrian, this is your story's full circle." But Adrian hesitated. He'd never sought a stage, yet something about the phrase rebuilding with integrity felt poetic. So he said yes. The speech. The day of the summit was clear and bright. The hall was filled with leaders from every corner of the world. Adrian stepped onto the stage wearing a simple gray suit, no notes in hand. The crowd stood, clapping, but he raised a hand gently to quiet them. He began softly. "I was never the smartest man in the room. I was just the one who refused to stop learning." He told his story, not the numbers, not the deals, but the lessons. He spoke about losing everything twice, about betrayal, forgiveness, patience, and rebirth. He told them about Lydia in Kenya, about Eli's mistakes, about Brent's apology. And finally, he said, "If there's one thing I've learned, it's that growth built on grace never collapses. Companies that value kindness last longer than those that value control. Because at the end of every deal, every meeting, every plan, there's a human being who just wants to be treated fairly." The audience sat in stunned silence. When he finished, there was no roaring applause, just quiet standing respect. Some were crying, some were writing notes. And in that moment, Adrian realized something. He had become exactly who he was meant to be, not a businessman, but a guide. The final chapter.
A few years later, Adrian decided it was time to step away completely. He called Eli to the cabin one last time. "I'm leaving the board," he said. Eli was startled. "What? Why?" Adrian smiled. "Because you don't need me anymore, and that means I did my job." Eli looked down. "I'm not ready." "You are," Adrian said. "You've already made mistakes, and you've already grown from them. That's all leadership really is." They sat together until sunset. No goodbyes, just understanding. After Eli left, Adrian wrote a letter. Not for anyone to read now, but for the company to open one day. It said, "If you ever lose your way, remember this. The best leaders are not the loudest ones. They are the calm at the center of every storm." He sealed it, placed it in a wooden box, and left it in the office vault. Then he walked to the shore, the sky painted gold and orange, the waves reflecting his years. He smiled to himself and whispered, "I didn't build an empire. I built a legacy of peace." And as the tide rose, it carried away the last echoes of his old battles, leaving only calm behind. Epilogue. Years later, a young intern at Green Track found that letter. The company had grown into a symbol of ethical innovation, and yet, inside every office, they still had a portrait of Adrian Cole, not behind glass, not in gold, but in a simple wooden frame beside the mission statement. Below it was engraved a single line: "Rebuild quietly, rise with grace." And that
Time has a way of softening even the sharpest memories. Years passed, and the world kept spinning, faster, louder, more restless. But in a small coastal town, one man still lived slowly. Adrian Cole's hair had turned white, and his steps were slower now, yet his eyes carried the same steady light that once guided entire companies. He spent most mornings tending a small garden behind his cabin, growing vegetables for the local shelter. He liked the rhythm: plant, water, wait. It reminded him that all good things take time. Sometimes the town's children would see him walking along the dock with a notebook. They didn't know who he was. To them, he was just the quiet old man who always smiled and waved. And that's exactly how Adrian liked it. Letters and echoes. Every few weeks, letters still arrived. Thick envelopes from across the world. A startup in India thanking him for his mentorship. A logistics company in Brazil that built its operations on his principles. And once, a postcard from Lydia Mwangi, now a global voice for green manufacturing. She wrote, "You once told me that scars are lessons, and now I carry mine proudly, and I teach others to do the same." Adrian pinned that postcard beside his window. He didn't need trophies. He had testimonies. He often said to himself, "You never really retire from purpose. You just live it more quietly." The visit. One rainy afternoon, Eli drove to see him. It had been months since they last spoke in person. He brought warm bread from the city bakery and 2 cups of coffee, just like the old days. They sat by the fire while the storm rolled in. Eli looked older too, but still carried that spark of determination Adrian had first seen in him years ago. Eli looked older too, but still carried that spark of determination Adrian had first seen in him years ago. Eli said, "I wanted to tell you something. We've started a new project, a foundation in your name. It funds young entrepreneurs who can't afford formal education. We called it the Cole Initiative." Adrian's eyes softened. He laughed quietly. "You didn't need to put my name on it." Eli smiled. "We did, because every start in this company began with you." For a moment, Adrian didn't speak. He simply looked at the fire and said,
Then promise me one thing. Never let this become about me. Let it stay about them." Eli nodded. That was the last time they ever discussed legacy. The last lesson. In his final years, Adrian began writing again. Not business plans, but reflections. He called the notebook Stillness in Motion. It wasn't meant for publication. It was simply a letter to whoever found it after him. On one of the last pages, he wrote, "We spend our lives chasing success as if it's a destination. But success is not a place. It's a rhythm. You move, you fall, you rise. And through it all, you remain gentle." He closed the notebook, placed it beside the window, and looked out at the sea. Waves steady, unhurried, eternal. The farewell. One quiet spring morning, the caretaker found the cabin door open. Adrian's chair was empty, his coffee cup half full, a faint breeze moving the curtains. On the table lay a note in his handwriting. "If you're reading this, don't be sad. I've simply gone to join the silence that taught me everything. Remember, lead kindly, build patiently, forgive quickly." He was gone, peacefully, like he had lived. Years later, at Green Track's global headquarters, a new generation worked beneath the same mission statement he'd written decades earlier. Above the main entrance hung a simple wooden sign carved with his final words, "Lead kindly." Every year, on the anniversary of his passing, the company paused for 1 hour. No emails, no deliveries, no meetings. Just silence, to remember the man who proved that calm can change the world. Lydia, now on the board's foundation, often told new fellows, "He taught us that real power doesn't shout, it listens." And Eli, now nearing retirement himself, would sometimes walk to the coastal town where it all began. He'd visit the dock where a small plaque bore a single inscription, "Adrian Cole, he rebuilt with grace." Epilogue. History will remember many names for their profits, but only a few for their peace. Adrian Cole's legacy lived not in skyscrapers or bank accounts, but in the quiet courage of those who learned from him. People who chose patience over pride, ethics over ego, and kindness over chaos. Somewhere in every corner of the world, a young founder sits awake at 2 a.m., facing failure, reading one of Adrian's old quotes. You can start again, as many times as it takes, if you keep your heart steady. And maybe that's how his story truly continues. Not in grand monuments, but in small, steady ripples of integrity that will never fade. Because calm never dies. It multiplies.